Do you care for someone who has dementia, or you're noticing in a loved one some early behavior and you want to know if that's an early sign of dementia? Then today's storyteller, Sarah Jones, has an emotional story and a book full of inspiration and awareness about dementia so you never have to feel confused and alone. Hello and welcome to Beyond Diagnosis, a podcast to raise your awareness, decisions, and voice for alternative practices so you can take back control of your health. I'm Rita De Michele, your host, a mindset and empowerment coach, and the founder of the Onus platform. Join me each week so you can create the health of your dreams. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Rita. Nice to be
It's
here.
it's good to have you. And you know, when I read your book, which is this one, I actually resonated with it so well. So it's Dementia, Who Are You, and What Have You Done with My Mother?
That's right.
I have a very personal story around that as well. Like I was just talking to you, if you take away dementia and put in stroke, non-verbal stroke, I felt like you had written about my life,
Mm,
which was very emotional. And I think this is going to resonate with so many people who are carers, who are those silent carers.
mm.
Family members are those silent carers that really do need support. And I think a lot of them will get great value out of this book. So, watching a loved one decline, and in your case, it was your mother, who didn't remember you, must be heart-wrenching.
It is heart-wrenching. Yeah, it's one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. And I don't think you could ever anticipate just how hard it is until you've gone through it yourself. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's heart-wrenching for sure.
absolutely. So, how did you realize that your mum had dementia was, or even the beginning of dementia?
Mm. So I guess the initial catalyst for us to be a little worried was her hearing started to go. Uh, and we just thought that that was, normal for old age. So we suggested she go and get a hearing test. So she went with dad to get her hearing tested, and it came back that she only had 30% of her hearing. So that was a bit alarming. But the more alarming thing was that mum just wrote that off and said, "Oh, no, that's not true. That's not right. I can hear perfectly well." And we thought, what's strange? Like, it was a very weird reaction. Um, so that was the first thing, was just out of character for mum. If she'd had
Can I
something
just
else
ask,
wrong, she's
yeah, can I
got
just ask,
glass.
is the hearing connected to the dementia, or she just happened to have lower hearing and that was the entry point to realizing about her dementia?
No, some studies have shown that that can be an entry point to something to look out for, along with a lack of smell, which I didn't know either. She'd started to not be able to, I'd put perfume on and say, "Oh, do you like this perfume?" And she'd say, "I can't smell it." So that was also something that I hadn't realized was connected to early stages of dementia.
So what was she doing early on in the beginning that was really concerning for you?
Yeah, again, there were a lot of things that you could just put down to old age. Like she'd try to think of a word and couldn't quite get the word, or she would repeat herself. She'd say, "Tell me a story, this great story." And then literally within the half hour, she'd tell me the story again. I'd say, "Mum, you just told me that." And she wouldn't remember that she'd told me. And I think, oh, it's a little bit strange, a little
Mm.
bit, nothing too, worrying. And then bigger things started happening, more strange things. So she would cook dad breakfast. This happened one time. She cooked dad a big bacon and eggs breakfast, put the pan away, washed up, put everything away. And then an hour later, got everything out and cooked him breakfast again. And he said, "You've already cooked me breakfast, Jeannie." And she said, "No, I haven't. Don't be ridiculous." And that was worrying. There were other things that she would get lost in the neighborhood. She'd lived in the same house for over 30 years, and she'd go to the shops and get lost coming home, or she would walk to the shops and then spend an hour in the car park looking for her car. Or a couple of other things. She turned up at her friend's place, and that friend hadn't lived there for 10 years. Yeah, it was just a whole lot of things. It sort of was a growing concern. So we thought, we didn't really want to say the word dementia. We thought, oh, I hope it's not dementia. We tried to explain it away, particularly my father. He was uh, very unwilling to accept that there was something wrong. But we had a battle trying to get her to the doctor because she was saying there was nothing wrong with her. So
Yeah.
that was the first hurdle, just to get some sort of medical opinion to see if we were overreacting or if it was really something wrong.
Well, that actually, so what sort of time period, so if people understand, if they're starting to see first a few signs in their parents or any loved one, partner, whoever, um, what kind of timeline are we talking about between you going, oh, okay, mum's not hearing right, or she's not smelling right, to all of a sudden she's lost in a car park for an hour, because lost in a car park for an hour or cooking breakfast twice and not even smelling that, bacon and eggs, the smell hangs around a bit. Yeah,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
that sounds a little bit more advanced. What kind of timeline are you looking at there? I'm sure it's different for everyone, but what was it for you?
Yeah, exactly. Every case is different, but I'd say it was around 2 years of these strange things happening and
Right.
continually getting worse. The
Mm.
severity was increasing. Yeah, there was another time where she put some chops under the grill um, in the middle of the day. Dad was outside doing some gardening, and then she locked every door in the house, turned all the lights off, and went to bed with the chops on the grill. So Dad started to hear the smoke alarm going off, and I was trying to get in the house, but she completely locked it. It was like Fort Knox. He couldn't get in. And there was smoke coming out of the window, so he had to call the fire brigade. Mum didn't wake up, even though the smoke alarms were going off because of her hearing. And yeah, the fire brigade had to come, and yeah, so there were also some sort of dangerous things going on.
And is that because did she do that because she thought it was nighttime?
I think so, but I'm not sure why she would put the cooking. I think she just forgot. And she was forgetting to eat as well. So she'd cook Dad dinner and give him his dinner. And I think that they sometimes would eat their dinner in separate rooms, watching TV, having bad habits of watching TV with the dinner on their lap. But we'd say to Dad, is Mum eating? She was losing a lot of weight. He said, I think so. But it turns out she wasn't eating herself. She was just feeding him and forgetting to eat herself. So it was about a 2 year period, and there were things happening. So we saw her weight was, less. She was getting a lot thinner, and she was just a bit less organized. She was starting to pull away. Things like phone calls. I'd give her a call, and she wouldn't want to talk to me. She'd sort of put Dad on the phone, which was very unusual. Not that I don't like talking to my dad, but it was just our custom, if I'd call and Dad answer, he'd say, "Oh, I'll get your mum," and we'd have a good chat for an hour or so. But Mum started to not want to talk on the phone, which I thought that was very strange. Just so about a 2 year period, I think, where we were concerned and starting to get more concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds, I think one of the things that's really hard, and I read in your book about, you mentioned about your dad, and you've just mentioned it again, about your dad not really wanting to know. I think people really underestimate how scary it is for a partner to see their loved one, their partner, their husband, um, child, whoever it is, go through something like this
Mm,
and
yeah, it's
dealing with
also,
that emotional aspect of it as well.
I agree. Yeah. And for Dad, I think it was easy to just excuse things away.
Mm,
He didn't want to face it because facing it would mean a huge upheaval for him and for Mum. And I don't think he really wanted to go there. So he was just coping with things how they were and didn't want to upset the apple cart, so to speak.
yes.
Mm,
So how did you eventually find a diagnosis,
mm.
and what were your next steps after you received it?
So the first port of call was the GP, the general practitioner, and he I think he knew. We were hoping he'd say, no, don't worry, it's nothing to worry about. It's something very small. We'll be able to fix that. But he said, no, I think you need to see a specialist, which in Mum's case was a geriatrician. So we had an appointment with the geriatrician, and that didn't go well because something else that had started happening was that Mum had become obsessively drinking alcohol. And that was also something new that we hadn't seen before. And we didn't know if she'd becoming an alcoholic or, we were very concerned about that. I now know that that is a symptom of the type of dementia that Mum had, this obsessive behavior. It can be obsessively eating or obsessively drinking or
Right.
obsessive behavior in general. But the geriatrician didn't explain that. He was sort of saying, you've got to stop drinking and telling Mum that she had dementia, which was very dangerous because as soon as she heard that word, she just said, oh, there's nothing wrong with me, and became quite aggressive, which was also out of character. And she stormed out of the office. She stormed out of the surgery and left us all sitting there thinking, uh-oh, what do we do now? So he called my brother and I back without Mum for another appointment to sort of explain things a little further, and showed us the physical scan of Mum's brain. And I'll never forget that because it was really confronting. He showed us where the brain had actually shrunk. She said, this brain is atrophying. And just to see that physical evidence was pretty shocking.
It would be.
Yeah. And the fact that Mum just refused to acknowledge that there was anything wrong made it so difficult because we all knew that something was wrong, but we couldn't broach the subject with her at all. She would just fly into a rage, which was very uncharacteristic, I might say. So, yeah, that was just a really tricky time. So we had this diagnosis, but not much information. Well, I feel that the geriatrician could have been a lot more helpful in just telling us what lay ahead. He wasn't very helpful at all. He just told us what the diagnosis was, and, there you go. You have a diagnosis now, so that's all. My job's done. So,
And now you're left to actually swim through all the confusion yourself and
exactly.
find where that's one of the things. That is one of the hardest things. I mean, I found in my experience, and I'm hearing with your experience, is well, then what? What's my next step? So what
Exactly.
was your next step?
Well, thankfully, I had a friend who could advise me, and she suggested that we get an ACAT assessment, which is an Australian government initiative to assess someone. It's a cognitive test basically, and they do a test it's called a mini mocha test, which was devised by a doctor in Canada, and it's just a simple test asking basic questions like I think Mum had to name as many animals as she could name. I mean, she loved biology and she was a very intelligent woman. She could only get cat and dog, and that was it. And she had to count backwards from 100 by sevens, something like that. She only got to the first number, and then that was it. So just little things like that. And it was a big eye opener for us, and especially for Dad, to see that she really, she wasn't herself, and that this diagnosis was true.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you then, once you got the ACAT assessment done, was it recommended then that you put your mother into a care facility?
Well, not exactly, but they said she needed high care. So we did try and go down the avenue of keeping her in her own home, because also research and studies have shown that that can delay the onset of the symptoms, and it can make them feel much more at home, and obviously at home, but more relaxed and less anxious. But and that's what we really wanted to do, but it became more apparent as her symptoms worsened. She was getting up in the middle of the night and wandering around outside. She was, as I said before, she was putting the stove on at different times. She touched the iron with a hand. Just things like that were happening. And Dad just couldn't watch her 24 hours a day. It was it was a big burden for him to have to do that. And he's very social. So at that stage, he'd be going to the gym every day and leaving the house, leaving her alone. And we were really worried about that. So after a lot of deliberation, and we went down a lot of different paths so we really would have loved to have kept Mum in her own home. And we did explore that quite extensively. But as I said, it became a bit problematic because she needed to be watched 24/7. So we ended up having to go down the path of residential care. And the way we sort of got around with Dad, because he was still very reluctant to upset anything, he had to have an operation. So he was in hospital having his knee reconstructed. And in that time, we suggested that Mum have some respite care in a nursing home. And then with a view to perhaps if that worked out, she could stay on. So that was the plan. And yeah, the respite care worked really well. But then after that, yeah, we had a few hiccups.
And how did your mum feel? Like emotionally, did she, I know she was having issues, with memory, etc., but did she understand at all what was happening to her? Or why she was going into, like, I've well versed of having a mother in a nursing home, and you can see other residents who have sometimes no idea, especially with dementia, no idea what's happening. They're
Yeah.
just in their own world. Was your mum, was she cognitive of what was happening to her at all?
It's hard to say. At that stage, she was still fairly lucid. You could have a conversation with her, even though it would be going around in circles. She didn't really make much sense, but to the outsider, she could still converse, and it seemed like there wasn't too much wrong with her. So initially, we had her put into the general ward, or not ward, but the general population, if you like, not in the dementia area,
Yeah.
which made us happy because she seemed still streaks away from those other people that were quite a long way down the track with their
Mm.
dementia. So Mum was put in the general population, which was that was what we wanted initially, but it seemed that the staff were not really well versed in how to deal with someone with dementia. So Mum would incessantly ask them to go home. She she didn't really know why she was there. She knew Dad was off having an operation, but she kept forgetting that. And we told her this is just like a little holiday, if you like a little a breakaway while Dad was having his operation. But because she kept forgetting that, she just kept incessantly asking, I want to go home. I need to go home. Why can't I go home? And so the staff would say, you're staying here for a couple of weeks and then you'll go home. Stop asking and getting quite curt with her. So she became more and more frustrated. And I had brought things from home to make her room, seem a bit more comfortable. We bought some photo frames, had a digital photo frame. I thought if I put, a rolling frame of all of our pictures there, she wouldn't forget it. That was my thinking. And we brought her a bedside lamp and a few other things from home to make it feel cozy. And I had erected a little flat pack shelf in the bathroom, put all the things in there and made it all homely. And then every day when I would come to visit, she would have packed everything up, taken all the clothes out of the wardrobe, demolished the flat pack, packed everything back into the suitcase, and was ready at the door, quite anxiously waiting, when are we going home? Can I go home now? And so this just went on every day, and I had to unpack everything. And the next day I'd come and it'd be packed up again. This went on for a couple of weeks. It was very frustrating, but the staff didn't really offer me much support, and they were just getting more frustrated with her. And so Mum, very out of character, I must say, she punched the nurse, which is terrible. I feel so ashamed that this happened, but she just out of frustration, gave a
So
left
did
hook
my
to the
mum. My,
nurse.
my mum punched the nurse too.
Yeah, so it was terrible. And they gave us a call. It felt like, your child's in trouble at school, getting a call from the principal saying that she'd misbehaved. And so they said, oh, she's going to have to leave. So our plan of having, her stay on was just dashed. So, and they also wrote quite a scathing report saying that she was aggressive, and this was just a big blot in her copybook. So we then had to find another nursing home that would take her. And every door we went to, we had to show them this report. And they would look at it and say, oh, we have a very settled dementia area. I don't think we really want your mum there. So it was really hard for us to find somewhere for her. And I just wanted to scream, this is not normally her. This is her disease. This is not, she's normally not like this. So that was really frustrating. And then we finally found somewhere. And I just immediately noticed the difference in the training of the staff because the place we found was all dementia. So they'd obviously had a lot more.
Is that what you would recommend to somebody who's listening to this podcast, hearing your story and what you went through? Because there is a lot of frustration in nursing facilities, nursing home facilities, where the staff, they do the best they can, but they're
Yeah.
not educated around people with dementia if they're not in a high care facility area for dementia, if they're in more the general residential area with stroke, uh, all of those sort of things, they don't have that level of education. So without awareness and education, the care is not how these particular residents need it.
Mm,
Is that
that's
one,
right.
was that one of the things that really, got to you? And how did you get around that? Like for someone listening to this, thinking, oh, I better not put my mother into a normal nursing home. I need a specialized nursing home. Is that what you would recommend for, especially for dementia?
I'll definitely have, in hindsight, it's a great thing. I think I would definitely just inquire about the level of training in dementia care that they had because I feel it's a quite a different way of dealing with people.
Mm.
And I know that training and this kind of education is happening all the time, and it's getting better and better because this is going back a few years now. But it was just chalk and cheese. So that when mum would say, I want to go home, I need to go home, she'd have a bag packed. The people at the new nursing home would say, oh, that's fine. The taxi will be here in a couple of hours. So why don't you give me your bag? You go down and have some dinner, and I'll tell the taxi driver that you'll be out in a minute, and they just really allayed her fears, and all the anxiety would just,
And you
be
had to play to her concerns
that's
of
right.
what she was feeling.
Exactly right. And she would just go down to dinner. While she was at dinner, they'd take her bag up, unpack it. I didn't have to do it. They'd do it. And she'd just completely forget, peacefully go off to bed after dinner. It was just, yeah, like I say, it was chalk and cheese.
Distraction is a
Yeah.
great thing.
And I think treating dementia sufferers with, you mentioned dignity, with that sense of dignity, and giving them as much autonomy as possible. I know some nursing homes in other countries, they set up like a little village so they can still
Yeah.
go shopping, or it's pretend shopping, obviously in a safe environment. They can go shopping, they can do some washing, or all those things that have been a fabric of their lives for so long. They can still participate in those things rather than just sitting in a chair all day, um,
Yeah,
staring
the
at screen.
Scandinavian countries do that really well.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think there's a great one in Holland as well, in the
Yeah.
Netherlands. And I know there are some in Australia now that have like a little dummy bus stop, so they can sit and wait for the bus and that sort of thing. It's really helpful. So yeah, I was just so pleased with this new care. It was great.
And how long was it before her decline to where she didn't really recognize you anymore?
Well, it's hard to say. She was in care for 8 years. I think probably after about 4 years, maybe she started to lose her ability to communicate. That was a really big blow. And then, it was a very one-sided conversation, and we ran out of topics to talk about. That was really difficult because we'd always been so talkative. That was a really great thing about Mum and I. We could just talk about anything for hours. So I really missed that, and just all the topics were just fraught. You couldn't talk about the family because she would be confused. She didn't know who you were talking about. You couldn't talk about anything in the news, obviously, or
Mm.
what you've been reading or you've been watching. There was just nothing like that to talk about. So it was all nice day outside, or we'd talk about what we were wearing. Or I even I'd go there with lots of jewelry on, or, fancy things in my hair just so we had something to talk about. And there was a cafe that we could go to that had a fish tank. So we'd often sit by the fish tank and then we could talk about the fish. um, yeah, so that was hard. I think she still had some sort of glint of recognition. She knew that she knew me and she knew that she loved me, but I don't think she could have told you my name.
She
That
didn't really understand why, why she knew you or why she loved
oh,
you.
I don't. I like to think she still knew that who I was, and my brother and my dad, the three of us. I'd say
Mm,
she still knew who we were. You know that we were very close to her at least. But
yes.
my kids or my brother's kids, I don't think she remembered them or knew their names, and that was really hard. That was hard for them. Yeah.
Mm. It is such an emotional thing, and that's something I would like to touch on now because it is very what can I say? People underestimate the impact of being a carer, even though your parent is in a facility, in a nursing home, especially when they don't speak anymore. You as a carer, you're no longer really just a daughter going to visit,
Mm.
because your parent is aging and they can no longer be home. It's like the roles are reversed. All of a sudden now you almost become the parent
Yeah.
of, your mother that is now totally dependent. You're very keen on giving when you're dependent and someone has to do everything for you. You want
Mm.
to make sure that they maintain their dignity, that they are given respect, that they're obviously not being harmed, and even if they can't speak, at least they're being acknowledged. That's a lot of emotional weight to carry.
Mm.
Also, what also is underestimated is the impact it has on a family member as a carer and how
Mm.
you feel watching your parent go through this
Mm.
and the responsibility, and also sometimes the emotional guilt. I know that I definitely had times where my mother would start becoming a bit aggressive, or she would she couldn't speak either, continuously pointing and complaining about something, and you couldn't get it, and the frustration was so high that you knew you wanted to visit, you do it out of love, but sometimes there's that dread to go there.
Mm.
Did you have that?
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I feel so guilty about that, but I know it's
See,
a
who do you
normal.
have to talk to about that? You
That's
can't,
right.
it's someone doesn't understand that. They say, how can you feel dread? You're going to
Yeah,
see your mother.
that's right. It was so difficult to visit. Some weeks I just thought, oh, and as you say, you'd go because you love them, and you even out of sense of duty, obligation, or I kept on going. I knew that that was my duty, I suppose, and I did want to see Mum. I loved her so much, and I wanted to see her, but it was so hard. Just the one-way conversation, and some days she'd be so angry. She'd already be scowling at me before I'd said a word. And I think, oh, this is gonna, it's an uphill battle. And I think you just have to find new ways of relating to them. Um, yeah, I think I say this in my book, and it sounds really silly, but just pulling faces would get her to laugh. So I'd sit there and just pull faces. I'd perfect my impressions of the different animals, and I'd fall off my chair. She loved a bit of slapstick, or just that sort of thing. That would get her laugh, and at least there'd be some sort of positive interaction. Also, it was good to go with someone rather than just going by myself. So if I could grab one of my kids or my husband or my brother or my dad, we could have a conversation, and Mum would be sort of a part of it, even though she couldn't talk. It'd feel like she was included. But if it's just one on one, it's so difficult. Um, yeah, so there were definitely times where I really dreaded it. And her dementia went through different phases as well. There was a patch there where she became very teary. The aggression sort of gave way to tearfulness, and she would just cry. And that was so gut wrenching. I'd sit there and watch her cry, and then when I'd leave, she'd yell out, "Don't leave me! Don't forget about me." Ironically, um, and sort of press her face up against the glass window, and I'd have to sort of, I'd be streaming tears down my face as well when I have to leave. So that was incredibly hard. Um, yeah, then there was later on, there were times where she'd just stare into space and she, it'd be like she wasn't even there. So I felt like I was talking to a brick wall. And I thought, and Dad found that really hard. Dad would just sit there with her and say nothing, whereas I'd feel like I had to fill the void with lots of nonsense and just talk to myself, basically. So
Yeah.
yeah, different phases. You just had to adapt differently and relate to them in a different way, I guess. My brother was really good at making mum laugh. So he had the knack. Yeah, because often I'd go the whole time I'd be there, she wouldn't even raise a smile. And I'd think, oh, go away feeling quite deflated. Yeah.
The emotional the emotional impact, but also the heaviness and the continuation of having this responsibility would weigh. And it would weigh on you as a person. And what was the impact of that in your family as a whole?
Yeah. I mean, I'd feel the days that I would visit mum, I'd come home and I'd feel definitely very down. And one of my sons is very perceptive emotionally. He would say, "Are you okay, mum?" And give me a cuddle. I really needed that. I really needed to sort of unload and vent and sort of talk about my day, which my family was great for that. Um, yeah, so that was really necessary. And talking with friends as well, just to share the load a little bit. But I think unless you're going through it yourself, it's very hard to be able to empathize and understand exactly what it's like. And I don't know about you, but when people would say, they'd be very concerned and lovely, and they'd say, "Oh, how's your mum?" And I just think, oh, I can't possibly put into words how she is. She's categorically terrible, she's disastrous. I don't even know who she is anymore. You can't really relate that to someone. So you say, "Oh, she's okay. There's not much change." Or that's the question you constantly get asked. How's your mum? So part of the reason I wrote this book as well is just a little bit of an insight to the emotional trauma that it is for the carers and the families of someone going through this.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sarah, whilst you're going through this for the 8 years, were you given, from any healthcare professional, doctor, from the nursing home, any sort of strategies that you could use to help you? Number one, to help your mother, and also to help you deal with all of this,
Not
or how
really.
to interact with your mother.
No, not really, to be honest. That would have been great. I
Yeah.
mean, the staff were fantastic. I can't speak more highly of them. They were absolutely fantastic and they knew just how to deal with mum. She had a couple of beautiful women there that would, come up and plant big kisses on her cheek and give her cuddles. And yeah, I was so grateful for that. And they had all activities going on during the week. There'd be cooking demonstrations and charades and things like, they had silent discos with the headphones. So they were doing things to keep the residents occupied and happy. But personally, we didn't really get much input into how to relate to what was going on. Mm.
So to finish up, what would you say to someone who is starting to recognize signs in a loved one and they're feeling confused? They really don't know what their first step is apart from going to a GP or seeing a specialist. What are some of the things that you wish that you did differently that you could actually help someone now?
Well, yeah, I think it would have been great to have been part of a support group. I wish
A
I'd looked
support
more into
group.
that. Yeah, just to meet with other carers. We did on special occasions where all the relatives would be invited to mum's nursing home for Mother's Day or Father's Day or Christmas. We'd have a big dinner, and it was just fantastic to be able to meet with other people going through the same thing that you're going through. That's the thing that I found the most helpful. So I wished that I'd had, yeah, more of a support group network, I guess. And yeah, I would definitely say to someone who is worried that they should definitely get an ACAT assessment done or some sort of assessment in their local area, see a geriatrician, and yeah, do a lot of reading, do a lot of research. But yeah, I hoped by writing the book that I've written, that would be a comfort to others and a feeling that they're not alone, and just
Mm.
sort of an insight into the roadmap of where it's heading. Because you can't sugarcoat it. It's really tough, and it is really heartbreaking to watch someone you love disappear and become less and less like themselves.
It is, that would be so, so difficult, so emotional, and it's really hard. It's really hard unless someone else has been in your shoes to really
Mm,
understand what the impact is emotionally on your mother, you, and your
mm.
family unit, to work through something like this. Um, yeah, and that's why, please tell us about what your book's called and, you know, where someone can buy it.
Yep. Okay. It's called, I'll just grab it. I've got a copy of it right here. It's called Dementia, Who Are You and What Have You Done with My Mother? And yeah, so as I said, I wrote it to be a comfort to those going through this, an insight for those who are not, and yeah, just a little bit of information. It's not a heavy read and it's not a medical book. It's just my own experience and what it was like for us. And so I hope that people will be able to relate to it and that it will really resonate with them. You can buy it from my website, which is wordsbysarahjones.com, and the books tab. It's also available through Booktopia and other selected bookshops around the place. Yeah,
Fantastic. And I think one of the key things in the title of your book is "What Have You Done with My Mother?" is
mm.
the key. That is a lot of emotional trauma comes around that. When
Yeah,
one minute your mother is one way and then the next they're not. And all of a sudden, the person you grew up with, the person you've known all your life, all of a sudden is no longer that person. That emotional transition of acceptance is so hard. That
mm.
is, I think, the most emotional time as a carer that,
Yeah,
and especially as a family member, as a carer, that you can actually go through.
that's right. And it happens so gradually that it's hard to pinpoint the exact spot where you think, wow, they're really not the same person anymore. Like it just happens so gradually. You don't really see it until the end, and you think, wow, who is this person? I don't even know who she is. She's so different to the mother that I knew and loved.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. As your mother had to, like you said in the beginning, accept that she had dementia, family members have to accept that the mother they knew is no longer that person and is
That's
now a
right.
new version of themselves.
That's right. You just have to love them the way they are.
Absolutely. Sarah,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on. This was a really good story, very inspirational. It gives a snapshot into what it's like for your parent to have dementia, but especially what it's like as a carer for someone who can no longer care for themselves. And that, like we were just saying, that transition of accepting the new version of who they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure.
That's all right. Thank you so much, Rita.
And everyone, if you would like to order the book, the link will be in the show notes. So please go there. It is a great read. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks.
I would love to know, what was the biggest insight or aha moment you got from this interview? So you can now speak up, take action, and make informed decisions for your health. And if you like this episode, get instant access to your free ebook, Alternative Wisdom, Taking Back Control of Your Health, at life-onus.com.